My husband said we are poor for 12 years, but I accidentally found an old safe in his garage. Inside was $5 million in cash. I said nothing and quietly made one phone call. It changed everything. Good day, dear listeners. It's Diana again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please subscribe to my channel and like this video. And also let me know in the comments which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. I used to think I knew what contentment looked like. A 3-bedroom house on Elm Creek Drive in Denton, Texas. A husband who came home every evening by 7. A savings account that never seemed to grow, no matter how carefully I budgeted. That was my life for 12 years, and I had made my peace with it. Or at least I thought I had. My name is Carol Whitman. I was 41 years old when everything I believed about my marriage turned out to be a carefully constructed lie. Marcus and I met in our late 20s at a company picnic. He was charming in a quiet, deliberate way. The kind of man who listened more than he spoke, who remembered your coffee order and your mother's birthday. I fell for that steadiness. I married it. We had a daughter, Lily, and a routine that felt safe. Marcus worked as a regional sales manager for an industrial supply company. The salary was decent, not remarkable. He told me that early and often. We're not rich people, Carol. We have to be careful. Those words became the rhythm of our household. Every vacation was budgeted to the dollar. Every appliance replaced only when it broke past repair. When Lily wanted ballet lessons, Marcus sat at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and showed me, column by column, why we couldn't quite afford them that semester. I nodded. I believed him. I worked part-time at a dental office to help cover the gaps, telling myself that was just what responsible couples did. Looking back now, I can identify the first real crack, the moment I should have stopped and asked a harder question. It was a Tuesday in February, 2 years before I found the safe. Marcus left his phone on the kitchen counter while he showered. It buzzed twice. I wasn't snooping. I simply glanced over the way anyone would. The name on the screen read D. Harlow, and the preview said, "Transfer confirmed. Will hold until further notice." I didn't recognize the name. I set the phone face down and told myself it was work. But the mind keeps records, even when we instruct it not to. The second crack came that spring. Marcus began going to the garage on Sunday evenings. Not to work on his truck. He'd always been indifferent to that kind of thing. But simply to be there. He'd stay for 40 minutes, sometimes an hour, and come back inside with the careful, neutral expression of a man who has just finished thinking through something large. I asked once what he was doing out there. "Just decompressing," he said, and kissed my cheek. I accepted it. The third crack was a phone call he took in the driveway on a December night, standing in the cold with his back to the kitchen window. I watched from behind the curtain. He wasn't arguing. He wasn't laughing. He was speaking with the concentrated stillness of someone giving instructions. When he came back inside, he said it was a client having a crisis. By then I had learned not to ask follow-up questions. I had learned to make myself smaller inside my own home, and I hadn't even noticed when that happened. Then came the Saturday in March that changed everything. Lily was at a friend's house. Marcus had driven to Dallas for what he called a quarterly review, an overnight trip he made 4 times a year. I was cleaning the garage, something I rarely did, motivated by nothing more than a restless afternoon and the faint ambition of organizing the storage shelves. I moved a rolled canvas tarp that had leaned in the far corner for as long as I could remember. Behind it, bolted to the concrete floor and half hidden beneath a plywood shelf, was a safe. It was black, heavy-gauge steel, roughly the size of a small file cabinet. I had never seen it before. Or rather, And this is the part that chilled me most. I had simply never looked. It had been there, and I had moved around it the way we move around things we have decided not to examine. I stared at it for a long time. My hands were still holding the tarp. The garage smelled of motor oil and old cardboard and something I couldn't name. The particular staleness of a space that held a secret. I didn't touch the dial. Not yet. I took a photograph with my phone, then replaced the tarp exactly as I had found it, adjusted the plywood shelf, and walked back into the house. I sat at the kitchen table with a glass of water I didn't drink. 12 years. 12 years of yellow legal pads and careful columns, and we're not rich people, Carol. What was inside that safe? And, more terrifying still, what kind of woman had I been not to have asked sooner? I didn't call Marcus. I didn't send a text. I sat with that question until the sun went down and the house turned dark around me. Then I picked up my phone and called my sister, Dana, in Fort Worth. Not to tell her what I'd found, not yet. Just to hear a voice I trusted while I figured out what I was going to do next. Dana didn't know why I called that night. I told her I just missed her, and she believed me, because that was the kind of sister she was, warm and uncomplicated and willing to take things at face value. We talked for 40 minutes about nothing, her kids, a recipe she'd tried, the weather turning. By the time I hung up, my hands had stopped shaking, but my mind hadn't stopped moving. I went to bed before Marcus came home the next evening. I lay in the dark and did something I hadn't done in years. I reviewed my own life from the outside, the way you'd examine a document for errors. What did I actually know? What did I have access to? What was my name on? The answers came like small, cold stones dropping into water. The house was in both our names, that much I knew. But our joint checking account held, at any given time, roughly $4,000. Marcus managed everything else. He paid the bills online. He handled the tax returns. I signed where he pointed. Our one shared investment, a modest 401k through his employer, had statements that went directly to his work email. I had never asked for copies. He occasionally gave me a summary, a number he mentioned casually over dinner, and I had written it in the margin of my own memory without ever verifying it. I was a woman who had handed her financial life to another person and called it trust. That realization didn't come with rage. Not immediately. It came with a slow, nauseating clarity, the way your eyes adjust to a dark room and you begin to make out shapes you wish weren't there. I had worked for 12 years. I had budgeted and deferred and told Lily no to ballet lessons. And somewhere in our garage, behind a canvas tarp, there was a safe bolted to the floor that I had never been invited to know about. I spent the next 2 days moving carefully. Marcus was home, so I could not afford to let anything shift in my face or my voice. I made dinner. I asked about his trip. I watched him the way I had never let myself watch him before. Not with suspicion, but with the precise, patient attention of someone who understands that what they are looking at is not entirely what it appears to be. And what I saw disturbed me more than the safe itself. He was relaxed, genuinely, completely at ease. Whatever he was carrying, it did not weigh on him. That told me something important. This was not new. This was a man who had been managing a double reality for a very long time and had made his peace with it. The guilt, if there had ever been any, was gone. That was when the fear arrived. Not the startled fear of surprise. That had passed. This was a colder, more operational fear. The kind that tells you you are in a situation where a wrong move has consequences. Because here was the obvious question: where does $5 million in cash come from? A regional sales manager's salary does not produce $5 million in cash. Cash, specifically, not investments, not equity, not retirement accounts. Cash in a bolted safe is cash that exists outside the banking system. It is cash that someone has chosen not to report. It is, in most cases, cash connected to something a person would not want examined. Was my husband a criminal? The word felt enormous and slightly unreal, the way certain words do when you apply them to someone who has sat across your dinner table for 12 years and asked how your day was. But the evidence was sitting in my garage, and I had a responsibility to myself and to Lily to understand what I was living inside. I made a list, not on paper. I wrote it in my phone's notes app, buried in a folder labeled Grocery Ideas, because I was already thinking carefully about what could be found and by whom. The list had 3 columns: what I know, what I need to know, what I need to protect. Under what I need to protect, the first item was Lily. The second was my financial standing in this marriage. The third was myself, physically, legally, completely. My first plan was simple and built on one principle. I would not confront Marcus. Not yet. Not without knowing what I was dealing with. A man who keeps $5 million in a private safe and lies about poverty for 12 years is not a man you confront over breakfast with a half-formed accusation. That was a fast way to find yourself on the wrong side of a situation I didn't yet fully understand. What I needed was information, and I needed someone who knew how to get it quietly. I remembered a name from a conversation I'd had 3 years earlier at the dental office. A patient, a woman named Greta Solis, who had navigated a divorce from a husband who'd hidden assets across 3 states. She'd mentioned her attorney. I hadn't written the name down, but Greta was still a patient. Her file was in the system. The following Monday, I was scheduled to work a half day. During my lunch break, I drove to a coffee shop 4 miles from the office, sat in the corner booth with my back to the wall, and made one quiet phone call. The receptionist at the law firm of Hale & Brennan in Fort Worth answered on the second ring. I asked for an appointment with Patricia Hale, the attorney Greta had named. "She has an opening Thursday at 2, the receptionist said. "I'll take it," I said. I paid for my coffee in cash, drove back to work, and spent the rest of the afternoon cleaning teeth and asking patients whether they were flossing, and no one in that office had any idea that the woman beside them had just decided to change her life. Patricia Hale's office was on the 14th floor of a building in downtown Fort Worth, with windows that looked out over the Trinity River. She was in her mid-50s, compact and precise, with reading glasses she removed the moment I sat down, a gesture that said, "I am looking at you now, not at paper." I liked her immediately. I told her everything in the order it had happened. The safe, the photograph, the 12 years of financial dependency I had allowed to build around me like a wall I'd mistaken for a home. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she folded her hands on the desk. "Before we discuss options," she said, "I need to ask you something directly. Do you have any reason to believe you are in physical danger?" I thought about Marcus, his evenings in the garage, his calm at dinner, his easy lies. "I don't think so," I said, "but I don't know what I don't know." She nodded. "That's the right answer. Let's start from there." What Patricia told me over the next 90 minutes reorganized everything. In the state of Texas, all assets acquired during a marriage are presumed to be community property, including assets a spouse has deliberately concealed. A hidden safe full of cash was not legally his alone to keep, but proving that required documentation, and documentation required investigation. She referred me to a forensic accountant named James Court, who specialized in marital asset tracing. She also advised me, quietly, firmly, to begin collecting financial records, tax returns, any statements I could access, mortgage documents, anything with both our names. She told me not to move anything from the garage, not to touch the safe, not to say a word to Marcus. Right now, surprise is your most valuable asset, she said. The moment he knows you know, that changes. I drove home feeling something I hadn't expected. Not fear, but focus. Over the following week, I moved through our house with new eyes. I photographed every document I could find in Marcus's home office. The filing cabinet he'd never locked because he'd never imagined I would look. Tax returns from the past 4 years. Bank statements for an account I hadn't known existed at a credit union in Grapevine. A lease agreement for a storage unit in Irving, signed in Marcus's name alone, renewed annually since 2019. A storage unit, in addition to the safe. I photographed everything and uploaded it to a secure folder Patricia's office had set up for me. James Court began his analysis. What he found over the following 10 days was a structured pattern of financial concealment that he estimated had been running for at least 8 years. Shell company payments, cash transfers routed through an LLC registered in Nevada under a name I didn't recognize. Harlow Industrial Solutions, D. Harlow, the name from the phone screen 2 years ago. The LLC connected Marcus to a man named Derek Harlow, a former business associate who, according to public records James pulled, had 2 civil fraud judgments against him in the state of Oklahoma. Marcus's company had a legitimate contract with a Harlow-affiliated supplier, but the money moving through the LLC was not commission. It was structured. It was hidden. And James told me in a carefully worded email that the pattern was consistent with undisclosed income from an ongoing business arrangement that was intentionally excluded from joint financial reporting. He was being careful with language, but I understood. Then came the moment that became the point of no return. It was a Wednesday evening. Marcus was in the shower. His laptop sat open on the kitchen table, a habit he'd always had, leaving it running while he ate dinner. I had never touched it. That evening, something made me pause beside it. The screen showed an email client. The inbox was visible, and near the top was a message from an address I didn't recognize, with a subject line that read, Carol. Has she said anything? I took a photograph of the screen with my phone before I even registered what I was doing. I walked to the living room and sat in the chair by the window. My heart was beating in a way I could feel in my throat. Carol, has she said anything? Someone knew about the safe. Someone knew that I might know. And Marcus had been corresponding with them about me. I was not just uncovering a financial secret. I was inside a situation where other people were monitoring me. I forwarded the photograph to Patricia that night with 3 words in the subject line. Please call me. She called the next morning. Her voice was calm, but I could hear the shift in register that meant she was taking this more seriously now. This changes the timeline, she said. We need to move faster. And Carol, you need to be very careful about your behavior at home. Nothing can change. He cannot know that you know. He won't, I said. And he didn't. Because I had spent 12 years learning to be invisible in that house. And for the first time, that skill was working entirely in my favor. Patricia filed on a Thursday morning. The petition for divorce cited concealment of marital assets and requested a full financial disclosure and forensic audit under Texas Family Code provisions. James Court submitted his preliminary findings as an attachment. 17 pages documenting the Nevada LLC, the credit union account, the pattern of structured transfers, and the safe, supported by my photographs and the lease on the storage unit in Irving. At 10:15 that morning, a process server arrived at Marcus's office building in Plano. I was at work when it happened. I was polishing a tray of instruments and thinking about nothing in particular when my phone buzzed with a text from Patricia's paralegal. Served. 10:17 a.m. I set the tray down. I breathed. I went back to work. Marcus called me 11 times between 10:30 and noon. I let every call go to voicemail. At 12:03, he sent a text that said simply, "Come home. We need to talk." I did not respond. Patricia had advised me not to communicate with him outside of written correspondence copied to her office, and I intended to follow that instruction precisely. When I arrived home that evening, Marcus was sitting at the kitchen table. He was not the relaxed man I'd been watching across dinner for the past 3 weeks. He was tight, jaw, shoulders, hands flat on the table, and there was something in his eyes I had never seen there before. It took me a moment to identify it. It was calculation. "You went to a lawyer," he said. "Yes," I said. "Why didn't you come to me first? I could have explained." "Explained what, Marcus?" I set my bag on the counter. My voice was steady. I had rehearsed this moment, not the words exactly, but the stillness. The safe, the LLC, the account in Grapevine I wasn't supposed to know about. I paused. Or the emails about whether I'd said anything. Something shifted in his face. The calculation sharpened. "You don't understand what you've walked into," he said. "This isn't... Carol, there are people involved in this that you don't want looking at you. Are you threatening me? I'm warning you." His voice had dropped to a register I'd never heard from him, quiet and absolutely deliberate. Derek Harlow is not the kind of man who responds well to legal interference. If this audit opens things up, it doesn't just affect me. It affects people who have resources and who protect their interests. I looked at him across our kitchen, the kitchen where I had cooked 12 years of dinners, helped Lily with homework, stood at the sink watching the backyard go through its seasons, and I felt a clarity that was almost like grief. "Is that Derek Harlow communicating through you right now?" I asked. "Or is that my husband?" He didn't answer. I went upstairs, locked the bedroom door, and called Patricia. I recounted the conversation word for word. She was quiet for a moment. "What he just did," she said, "constitutes intimidation of a party in a legal proceeding. I want you to write down everything he said, timestamp it, and email it to me tonight. And Carol, do you have somewhere you and Lily can stay for the next few weeks?" Lily was at my mother's in Oklahoma City that weekend. I called my mother and asked her to keep Lily for a little longer. I told her I'd explain soon. Then I packed a bag, drove to Dana's house in Fort Worth, and slept for the first time in weeks without listening for sounds on the other side of a door. 3 days later, Patricia called to tell me that Marcus's attorney had made contact. They wanted to negotiate privately. They wanted the forensic audit halted. They were offering a settlement figure, a number Patricia read to me that was substantial but represented, in James Court's estimation, approximately 30% of what the documented assets suggested. "He's lowballing you," Patricia said, "and he's hoping you're frightened enough to take it. What do you recommend?" "I recommend you let me respond," she said, "and I recommend you enjoy your weekend." I took a long walk along the Trinity River that Saturday morning. The water was low and brown and moving quietly. I bought a cup of coffee from a truck near the park. I sat on a bench and watched a family of ducks move through the shallows, entirely indifferent to anything that wasn't the river and the morning light. I gave myself those 3 days, not because I was finished. I was nowhere near finished, but because a person needs to refuel. I had done something large and irreversible and correct, and I needed to inhabit that for a moment before the next stage began. The offer came through a different channel than I expected. It wasn't Marcus's attorney this time. It was Marcus himself. Or rather, it was a version of Marcus I had never fully met, the one that emerged when the ordinary performance was no longer sufficient. He showed up at Dana's house on a Tuesday afternoon with flowers and the expression of a man who believed that presentation still mattered. Dana called me from the front window. "Carol, he's here, with roses." I came downstairs slowly. I opened the front door. I did not invite him in. Marcus stood on the porch steps looking at me with an expression I can only describe as studied sincerity. Grief adjacent, calibrated. The roses were white. He knew I preferred white. "I just want to talk," he said. "Not through lawyers. Just us." "What do you want to say?" "I want you to understand why." He exhaled as though the honesty of it cost him something. "The money. I know how it looks. But I was building something. For us. For Lily. Derek was a business opportunity that had to stay off the books. Legally complicated, Carol, not criminal. And I never wanted you to worry. I was going to tell you when it was clean." 8 years, I said. That's a long time to wait until it was clean. "I know." He held the roses out slightly. "I know, and I'm sorry. But what's happening now, this audit, the legal process, it's going to unravel things that can't be unraveled safely. There are other people's money in this. Derek's investors. If you force a full disclosure, it doesn't just hurt me. It could hurt Lily. It could hurt you." There it was. The same threat in softer packaging. I looked at him standing on Dana's porch steps with his white roses and his careful sorrow, and I thought, this is not remorse. This is negotiation. A man who is genuinely remorseful doesn't open with consequences. He doesn't position his apology as a warning. "Marcus," I said, "you should go." "Carol, your attorney can contact Patricia Hale. That's the only conversation that's happening now." I closed the door. I stood in Dana's hallway for a moment, listening to my own breathing. Then I heard his car pull away, and I went to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. Dana came and stood beside me. She didn't say anything right away. Then, "Was that what I think it was?" "He tried to convince me to drop the case," I said. "Is it working?" "No." She put her arm around my shoulders, and we stood there for a while, not talking. Sometimes that's all social support needs to be. Another body in the room, a wordless acknowledgement that you are not inventing the difficulty of what you're going through. But I needed more than that, practically. I was increasingly aware that I was navigating something that had dimensions I couldn't fully see. Derek Harlow and his investors were a variable I didn't control. I didn't know who they were or what they were capable of. Patricia had referred me to a security consultant, a retired federal agent named Bill Castillo, who occasionally worked with clients in high-stakes divorces involving financial crime. I called him. Bill was compact and unhurried on the phone, the way people are when they've spent years in rooms where panic accomplishes nothing. He asked me a series of practical questions. Did I vary my routes? Did I use the same gas stations on a predictable schedule? Had anyone seemed to be watching the house or Dana's address? He recommended a few specific changes to my routine without dramatizing them, and he agreed to make a quiet inquiry into Derek Harlow's background using connections from his previous work. What he found took 4 days and arrived in a summary document he emailed to me and Patricia simultaneously. Derek Harlow had no criminal convictions, but he had a history, documented in civil proceedings across 3 states, of moving investment money through legitimate front operations, taking substantial undisclosed fees, and restructuring when legal pressure mounted. He was not violent. He was, Bill wrote, a man who uses financial leverage as his primary instrument of pressure. That was clarifying. He could threaten our case. He could threaten Marcus. What he couldn't do was make the money disappear because Patricia had already ensured it was part of the court record. I told Dana that evening, sitting at her kitchen table with takeout containers between us, that I thought we were going to be all right. She raised her water glass. "I never doubted it," she said. But as I drove back to her guest room that night, I was aware that the quiet around the case wouldn't last. I had something Derek Harlow needed to keep buried. And men like that, Bill had told me, don't stay at a distance when their exposure is increasing. I was right. The call came 3 days later. They came on a Saturday. Not Marcus alone this time. Marcus and a man I had never met in person but recognized immediately from the photograph Bill Castillo had included in his summary document, Derek Harlow. 52 years old, according to the record, broad-shouldered, well-dressed, with the kind of surface pleasantness that only works if the other person has decided not to pay close attention. They knocked on Dana's front door at 11 in the morning, which was itself a kind of statement, a Saturday mid-morning, a social hour, as though this were a visit between neighbors. Dana looked at me when the knock came. I nodded once. She opened the door. "Mrs. Whitman," Derek said. "Not Carol, not Ms. Whitman, but Mrs. Deliberate and specific. I hope we're not intruding. My name is Derek Harlow. I'm a business associate of Marcus's. I was hoping we might have a few minutes to speak with you." His voice was warm and unhurried. "We thought it might be useful to clear some things up directly, rather than through the formality of all these proceedings." "You can come in," I said. I had called Patricia that morning and told her I expected contact. She had advised me on exactly 2 things. Record the conversation if I legally could. Texas is a one-party consent state. And do not agree to anything. I had my phone in my cardigan pocket with the voice memo app running before I opened the door. We sat in Dana's living room, Derek and Marcus on the sofa, Dana and I across from them. Dana stayed because I had asked her to. A witness, uncredentialed but present. Derek folded his hands with the ease of a man who believes he is still in control of a room. "I want to start by saying," he began, "that I have enormous respect for what you've done. Discovering that your husband had been less than transparent. That takes courage to confront." He paused. "It also shows that you're someone who values the truth." I said nothing. I waited. "Here's what I'd like you to understand," he continued. "The arrangement Marcus and I have is complex but fundamentally sound. The issue is structure, not intent. If this forensic audit proceeds to full disclosure, it creates a regulatory exposure that neither of us can control. And frankly, it would significantly reduce the assets available to divide." He smiled. "You'd essentially be spending $2 million to prove a point." "What point would I be proving?" I asked. "That you want to punish Marcus more than you want to protect your financial future." He leaned forward slightly. "Lily needs stability, Carol. A legal battle that drags a federal inquiry into this is going to take years. What we're prepared to offer is immediate, clean, and generous. $2.3 million in a structured settlement, no audit, no disclosure, private resolution." He paused. "That's a significant life for you and your daughter." I looked at him for a moment. Then I looked at Marcus, who was sitting beside this man and watching me with the expression of someone waiting to see which way a coin would fall. "Let me make sure I understand," I said. "You're asking me to drop a court-ordered forensic audit, accept less than half of what the documented assets suggest I'm entitled to, and keep private an arrangement that may have involved unreported income for 8 years. I tilted my head slightly. Is that accurate? Derek's pleasantness held, but something behind it tightened. I'm offering you a resolution that protects everyone involved. It protects you, I said. The warmth left his face with surprising speed. Mrs. Whitman. His voice was still level, but the register had changed. Lower, stripped of the performance. I want you to think very carefully about your position. You are one person with one attorney. The interests on the other side of this table are considerably more organized. He let that sit for a moment. There are ways this process can become very difficult for you that have nothing to do with what happens in a courtroom. Dana stood up from her chair. I think this conversation is finished, she said. It was the right call. I stood. You should leave, I said. Derek looked at me for 3 more seconds, a deliberate count, meant to be felt. Then he rose, straightened his jacket, and walked to the door with Marcus close behind him. At the threshold, Marcus turned. His face showed something complicated, something almost like regret. But the moment passed before I could be sure it was real. The door closed. Dana turned to me. Her face was white. Carol? I'm okay, I said, but I wasn't entirely. My hands were trembling, not from weakness, but from the excess of adrenaline that the body produces when it understands that a threat has just been made, clearly and in person, by someone who meant it. I stood in Dana's hallway and let myself feel that fear completely, because I had learned in the past several weeks that suppressing it didn't work. You had to let it move through you, and then, on the other side of it, something else came, something that felt like iron. They had come to my sister's house. They had sat in her living room. They had threatened me in front of a witness, and I had their voices on a recording in my pocket. I texted Patricia 4 words. He threatened me. Recording. She called within 2 minutes. When I described what had been said, she was quiet for a beat that I had come to understand meant she was choosing her next action. Okay, she said. That recording may constitute witness tampering and criminal intimidation. I'm going to consult with a colleague in the U.S. Attorney's Office tomorrow morning. Another pause. Carol, they've just made this significantly worse for themselves. I sat down on Dana's couch after we hung up. The fear was still there, underneath. It would be dishonest to pretend otherwise. But it was no longer the loudest thing in the room. The loudest thing was a cold, clean certainty. I was not going to stop. The deposition was scheduled for a Thursday morning in April, 3 months after I'd filed. Patricia had arranged it as part of the discovery process. Standard procedure, she explained, but strategically timed. By then, James Court had completed his full forensic report, 29 pages documenting 11 years of structured financial concealment, $5.2 million in identified assets connected to Marcus and Derek Harlow's LLC, and a pattern of underreported income that the report, carefully worded but unambiguous, characterized as consistent with both tax fraud and deliberate marital asset concealment. Patricia had shared a summary of those findings with a contact at the IRS Criminal Investigation Division and with the assistant U.S. attorney she knew from a previous case. She had also filed my recording of Derek Harlow's visit with the court as evidence of potential witness intimidation. The deposition took place in a conference room at Patricia's office. Marcus was there with his attorney, a man named Gary Spear, who had spent the weeks prior sending aggressive correspondence that Patricia had answered with patient precision each time. Derek Harlow was not present in person. His own attorney sat in the corner, thin-lipped and watchful. I sat across the table from Marcus for the first time in a formal legal context. He looked tired. The ease I had watched across our dinner table for 12 years was gone, replaced by a strained attentiveness, the look of a man tracking too many variables simultaneously. Patricia conducted the questioning. She began with the basics: Marcus's employment, his salary, his role in the LLC, and Marcus answered through Spire's intermittent objections with the careful vagueness of someone who has been coached to say as little as possible. He acknowledged knowing Derek Harlow. He described the LLC as an investment vehicle. He said the safe was a personal asset predating the marriage, a claim James Court's timeline directly contradicted. Then Patricia placed a document on the table. It was a bank transfer record showing a $340,000 movement from Harlow Industrial Solutions to a personal account in Marcus's name, dated 4 years into our marriage. "Mr. Whitman," Patricia said, "can you explain this transfer?" Spire leaned over. Marcus listened to something whispered, then said, "I'd need to review the context." "The context is provided in the exhibit," Patricia said. "The transfer occurs 11 days after the closing of your company's annual contract renewal with Harlow's supplier network. Is this payment connected to that contract?" It may have been a consulting fee." "Was that consulting fee reported on your federal tax return that year?" A pause. "I'd have to review the return." "James Court has reviewed it," Patricia said. She placed the second document. "It was not reported." The room shifted. Derek Harlow's attorney, who had been silent, leaned forward and said something quietly to Spire. Spire held up one hand, a gesture that meant I'm handling it. But the coordination between the two attorneys was now visible in a way it hadn't been before, and Patricia saw it too. She let the silence expand just slightly before continuing. What followed over the next 2 hours was not a collapse exactly. Experienced attorneys don't allow clean collapses, but it was an unraveling. Each document Patricia placed was a thread. Marcus had been coached to deny, defer, and request clarification, but James Court's report had been built to anticipate those moves. Every denial collided with a record. Every deferral was met with a timeline. Marcus's careful vagueness became, under that kind of sustained pressure, its own kind of evidence. The performance of a man who cannot tell the truth and has run out of convincing alternatives. At one point, Spire called a recess. They stepped out into the hallway for 11 minutes. When they came back, something had changed in Marcus's posture. The attentiveness was gone. He looked, for the first time in my experience of him, like a man who has put down something heavy and doesn't know what to do with his hands. The moment that I will remember longest came near the end. Patricia asked, "Mr. Whitman, did you at any point inform your wife, Carol Whitman, of the existence of the safe in your garage?" "No," Marcus said. "Did you at any point inform her of the existence of the account at Grapevine Federal Credit Union?" "No." "Did you, over the course of your marriage, represent to her that the household's financial situation was limited and discourage expenditures on that basis?" A long pause. Spire said nothing. The question was clean, and Marcus knew it. "We were careful with money," Marcus said. "That's not what I asked," Patricia said. Another pause. Then quietly, "Yes." I sat completely still. I had known this for months. The knowing hadn't changed, but hearing him say it in that room, on record in front of his attorney and mine, completed something. It was the sound of a lie acknowledged, finally, by the person who had told it. I looked at Marcus. He did not meet my eyes. Outside the conference room windows, downtown Fort Worth was going about its ordinary Thursday. Cars moved along the street below. The sky was pale and clear. Inside, the air held the particular stillness of a room where something large and irreversible has just been said out loud. I had come here with no illusions about what I would feel at this moment, but I had expected anger or grief or something sharp. What I felt instead was a vast and quiet steadiness, the specific calm of a person who chose not to run and was right not to. It wasn't over yet, but the direction was no longer in doubt. The deposition changed the calculations for everyone. Within 48 hours of that Thursday, Patricia received word that the IRS Criminal Investigation Division had opened a formal inquiry into Harlow Industrial Solutions and its principal operators. That development, she explained to me carefully, was not something she had caused. The referral she'd made months earlier had simply reached a threshold where the documented evidence was sufficient to trigger independent action. The federal government, once engaged, does not move on a litigant's timeline. It moves on its own. Derek Harlow's attorney filed a motion requesting that the court-ordered forensic audit be stayed pending the federal inquiry. The motion was denied. Patricia had anticipated it and had positioned our case precisely so that the civil proceedings could continue in parallel. It was a legal architecture she had built over months, quietly, while Marcus was offering roses on doorsteps and Derek Harlow was sitting in Dana's living room explaining how organized his interests were. The divorce case went to a hearing before a Tarrant County family court judge named the Honorable Sandra Ochoa, a woman in her 60s who had been presiding over high-asset divorce proceedings for 17 years. She was known, Patricia told me, for her thorough preparation and her intolerance for procedural games. Judge Ochoa reviewed James Court's forensic report, the deposition transcript, my photographic evidence, the recorded conversation in which Derek Harlow had made implied threats, and the documentary trail connecting the LLC to the safe, the storage unit, and the Grapevine account. She questioned both attorneys during a preliminary hearing with the focused efficiency of someone who has read the material and does not need it explained. Spire argued that the assets in question had been accumulated through legitimate business activity and that Carol Whitman had not contributed to that accumulation, which under Texas law might limit her claim. Patricia responded that Texas community property law does not require proportional contribution, that assets acquired during marriage are presumed marital property, and that deliberate concealment carries a statutory penalty in the form of fraud on the community, which courts may address by awarding the concealed assets entirely to the non-concealing spouse. It is not common for judges to apply the maximum remedy. Judge Ochoa applied it. Her ruling, delivered in writing 4 weeks after the hearing, awarded me 100% of the documented concealed assets, $5.2 million in identified cash and equivalents, the contents of the Grapevine account, the storage unit and its contents, and a lien on Marcus's share of the marital home until it was sold. She also awarded me full legal fees. In her written opinion, she used a phrase that Patricia later framed as a print and hung in her office. Systematic financial deception within a marriage is not a contractual dispute. It is a sustained violation of the trust upon which the institution depends. This court will not reward it. Marcus did not appeal. His attorney, I was told, advised him that an appeal would require relitigating the deposition transcript under conditions that were now considerably more dangerous, given the federal inquiry. He signed the final decree 6 weeks after the ruling. Derek Harlow's situation moved more slowly, as federal matters do, but it moved. The IRS investigation expanded to include the Oklahoma civil fraud cases and additional activity in Nevada. Harlow Industrial Solutions was dissolved by court order. Derek Harlow entered into a civil settlement with the federal government that included disgorgement of fees and a prohibition from serving as a principal in any registered investment vehicle for 15 years. He did not go to prison. The evidence supported civil liability more cleanly than criminal prosecution, and federal prosecutors made their calculation. I could have been angry about that. I decided not to be. What mattered was that the architecture of what he and Marcus had built was completely dismantled, not partially, not symbolically, but structurally and on the record. Marcus lost his position at the Industrial Supply Company shortly after the decree was finalized. An internal review triggered by the publicity around the federal inquiry. He moved to an apartment in Garland. His professional network, built over 15 years in regional sales, went quiet. People in that industry read court records when they need to. The morning after the decree was finalized, I sat in the kitchen of the house on Elm Creek Drive, my house now until the sale, and drank my coffee in the specific silence of a place from which a long tension has finally departed. I thought about 12 years of yellow legal pads and careful budgeting, and we're not rich people, Carol. I thought about Lily's ballet lessons. I picked up my phone and called the studio on 5th Street that Lily had mentioned last spring. They had openings for the fall session. I'd like to enroll my daughter, I said. That felt like the right place to begin. We moved in July. I bought a house in Southlake, smaller than some of the ones Patricia's financial planner had suggested I could afford, but with a backyard that backed up to a green belt and windows that caught the afternoon light in a way that made the kitchen feel like it was always golden hour. Lily chose her bedroom with the concentration of a person making a serious architectural decision, which at 12 she essentially was. She picked the one with the window seat. We painted it together on a Saturday in August. She chose a shade called Quiet Morning, which I thought was either very poetic or very practical, and which turned out to be both. We had takeout on the floor of her half-finished room and listened to music she was teaching me to like, and I looked at her laughing at something on her phone and thought, this is what it was supposed to feel like all along. Ballet started in September. Her teacher told me after the 3rd class that Lily had natural alignment. She holds her center well, she said, which I took as a practical observation and also, privately, as something like a metaphor. She does hold her center well. I don't know entirely where she learned it, but I'm glad she has it. My own life reorganized itself in ways I hadn't planned. I left the dental office in October, not urgently, but because I had the room now to consider what I actually wanted to do with my time, and the answer was not to continue doing the same thing I'd been doing as a financial stopgap. I enrolled part-time in a financial planning certification program at TCU. It felt like the appropriate next chapter for a woman who had learned what she had learned about what happens when you don't understand your own finances. Patricia Hale sent flowers when she heard. I called to thank her, and we talked for 20 minutes about something other than my case. My circle narrowed and clarified. I spent more time with Dana, whose kitchen table had been my operational base during the worst months, and which remained, afterward, my favorite place to drink coffee on a Sunday morning. I made new friends through a women's group at my church, women in their 40s who had been through various varieties of upheaval and arrived at a similar conclusion, that the second half of life could be, if you chose it carefully, better than the first. I dated a little, cautiously, and with a specificity of criteria that would have been foreign to the woman I was at 29. I was not in a hurry. Hurry is for people who are afraid of what stillness might reveal. As for Marcus, he was living in Garland in a 2-bedroom apartment, working for a small logistics company. He called Lily reliably, which I gave him credit for. He was, I had concluded, a complicated man who had made a sustained bad choice and was now living in the dimensions of it. The longer I was out of that house, the harder it was to locate what, exactly, had been real. I had been living inside a performance, and performances, even long ones, are not the same as lives. Derek Harlow had relocated to Arizona. His name appeared in a brief item in a Fort Worth business publication, noting the dissolution of Harlow Industrial Solutions and the federal settlement. The item was 4 paragraphs and ran below the fold. A man who had once described his interests as considerably more organized than mine had been reduced to a footnote. I thought of him sitting in Dana's living room, hands folded, confident that he was still running the room, and I thought of my phone in my cardigan pocket, the voice memo running, his threats documented in real time by the person he was threatening. It is a specific satisfaction. That. Lily's first recital was in December. She wore a pale blue leotard and concentrated with an intensity that I recognized. It looked like me in those months, working through something larger than I could see all at once, but moving through it nonetheless. Afterward, she found me in the lobby and asked if I'd seen her arabesque. I told her it was beautiful. She said she'd been practicing it in the backyard. "You'll get better every year," I told her. She shrugged with the pragmatism of 12. "I know," she said. "That's the point." I put my arm around her shoulders and we walked out into the December evening together. The night air was cold and clear, the world exactly as large as it actually is when you're standing in your own life without anyone managing the view for you. I took a breath. That, I had come to understand, is what freedom feels like from the inside. Not dramatic, not triumphant, just spacious, just yours. I found a safe behind a tarp in my garage, and it held $5 million that my husband said we didn't have. But what I actually found that day was simpler and more important than money. I found the edge of a lie I'd been living inside, and I chose to walk through it instead of around it. Here is what I learned. Financial dependence is not love. Silence is not peace. And a woman who pays attention, who asks the harder question, who picks up the phone and calls the right person, is not someone to be managed. What would you have done? Standing in that garage? I'd love to know. Leave a comment below and tell me your thoughts. And if this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Thank you for being here. It means more than you know.